Next is the affirmative re-cross-examination of negative Mr. Albrecht. You have 10 minutes to re-cross-examine Turretinfan. You may begin when you're ready.
All right, Turretinfan. I'm curious. When Augustine says, Benedictionem Christi fit corpus Christi, I'm sure you know where I'm talking about. We were speaking about the fit corpus Christi earlier. He's literally saying that after the blessing of Christ, that it becomes Christ's body. I don't think we have a contention there. But my question for you is this saying from Augustine, is it tied in with the panis, with the pan, with the bread, the Latin word for bread? Is this basically tied in for that, with that, excuse me? The sanctification, basically, when we're saying that the benediction is over the, when it says benedictionem Christi fit corpus Christi, is this benediction, is this sanctification, is it over the bread, is my question.
Is it in other words, is it a sanctification of the bread?
That is correct.
If you're asking me the grammatical question, I'm not sure, but I think I can answer it. In other words, I think I can figure out from this is the passage where he says not even as all bread, but upon the benediction of Christ becomes
right. That is correct. Yes. So you would agree
Sermon
that
234.
You would agree that the benediction is tied in with the panis, with the bread.
That is, I don't know what that word tied in means, but
basically, is the sanctification being made over the bread for this to become the body of Christ? I guess that makes it clearer.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way that I like the translation that that New City Press gives, which has to do with basically it says actually I don't know if I have that in front of me, but it's basically saying it's not as all bread, but the bread that's been sanctified is the body and blood of Christ, or becomes the body and blood of Christ.
Right, I agree. I have got no problem at all with that translation, but my question was really simple. It really doesn't hinge upon any fancy knowledge of the Latin. It was simply, I guess you can even see it in the English, it was simply that does the benediction, the sanctification basically, literally in the Latin, benedictionem, is that tied in with the bread in the sense that is the benediction the sanctification being made for the bread, and does that in turn cause us to become the body of Christ in Augustine's writing?
Well, I mean, now I have that translation in front of me. What it says is the faithful know what I'm talking about. They know Christ in the breaking of bread. It isn't every loaf of bread you see, but the one receiving Christ's blessing that becomes the body of Christ. So again, I'm not really sure what that word tied in means, but I think the sentence kind of speaks for itself about the relationship between. I mean, I think that's a good translation. I don't know.
Okay, so you would agree then that the sanctification is being made over the bread, and that is what basically causes for it to become the body of Christ. I just want to make sure we don't have any contention in that passage, with the interpretation of that passage.
I mean, I'm not sure if your second question is suggesting that the translation I just read wasn't a good one.
It's a good translation. No. I've got no problem with it. I've got no problem.
I mean, to the extent that your question was just saying, do you like that translation? Then yeah, I like that.
Okay, great. No problem then. I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page there. Okay. I'm going to quote something from Schaff. I'm sure you're aware of who Schaff is, of course. Am I correct?
Yes. He's
okay.
The one that in our last debate had the issue with quoting something from Basil, which we couldn't later track down in his...
Right, I remember that, right, yeah. All right, well, I'm going to quote something from Schaff real quick. Kind of silly me then to ask if you knew who it was. I forgot that. But Schaff says, yet this great teacher, in reference to Augustine, of course, at the same time holds fast the real presence of Christ in the supper. He says of the martyrs, they have drunk the blood of Christ and have shed their own blood for Christ. He was also inclined with the Oriental fathers to ascribe a saving virtue to the consecrated elements. Would you agree with Philip Schaff's comments here, Turretinfan?
I'm a little hesitant to agree with his words, simply because I'm not sure that it's really clear to everyone what he means by real presence there. In other words, whether what he means there is just spiritual presence, or whether he means something
Okay,
more
well,
than that.
I'll move on to the other thing he says. Would you agree when he says that Augustine, like the Oriental Fathers, ascribed a saving virtue to the consecrated elements? Would you agree with that?
Well, I think that that's inaccurate based on the point I mentioned earlier, where he distinguishes that the elements themselves from the grace. So he says you don't crush grace with your teeth. If that was the I think that was the translation I read earlier.
I'm simply asking if you agree with what Schaff says here or not. I've got no problem whether you disagree with him or not. I'm simply curious to see if you agree that Augustine ascribes a saving virtue to the consecrated elements, and I guess you don't agree with that, right?
Yeah, I think it's inaccurate.
Okay.
I'm not saying I strongly disagree, but I think it's inaccurate.
All right. Okay. My next question will be, my question is simple, and it's tied in with this. Since Schaff talks about a saving virtue to the consecrated elements, I think it's great. My question for you is, since Augustine uses the word that in many other places he uses, and it means worship, then wouldn't it mean? And I'm referring to the passage that I mentioned earlier, where he uses the word coming from the Latin adoro. Wouldn't it mean here that he is worshiping the flesh that we eat? As he says, basically he says that you must adore the flesh, and if you don't, you're sinning. My question, I guess, let me narrow down, isn't the flesh that he's referring to here the flesh because it has been sanctified? And is this not the worship of the consecrated elements, as basically what Schaff is saying? Would that not fit in with what Schaff is saying here?
No. Well, if you go back a few pages in in Schaff's work, you'll see that he says, "It is remarkable that Augustine, in other respects so decidedly Catholic in the doctrine of the Church and of baptism, and in the cardinal points of the Latin orthodoxy, follows the older African theologians Tertullian and Cyprian in a symbolical theory of the supper, which, however, includes a real spiritual participation of the Lord by faith." So, no, I don't think... excuse me, I'm sorry, he says, let me finish the sentence. Real by faith, and in this respect stands nearest to the Calvinistic or Orthodox Reformed doctrine, while in minor points he differs from them. It is as much as from transubstantiation and consubstantiation. So,
well, I understand exactly what you're saying, but
caveat.
I don't believe you're answering the question. I understand Schaff says, he said that. I didn't know it was before. I thought it was after. I understand he says that, but my specific question is, since Schaff does say that Augustine ascribes a saving virtue to the consecrated elements, my question is simply, in the verse where Augustine says that we must adore, we must worship the flesh that we eat, Christ's flesh, is this not the worship of the consecrated elements? That's basically what my question is for you.
It's definitely not It's definitely not enough for him to say that we worship Christ to turn that into worshiping the consecrated elements. In other words, we need to actually see him saying that.
Okay.
And we should. Yeah. Well,
okay.
Which is the? Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. My next question, before my time runs out, I think I have about a minute left, is Ambrose, as we both know, catechized Augustine. Ambrose many times says that we must adore the Eucharist, and I would argue that Ambrose is arguing for a worship of the Eucharist. We're not arguing at Ambrose, but wouldn't it then, in turn, be logical that Augustine, who uses the same word in the Latin adoro, the same word of adoration, wouldn't it be logical that he would be following his teacher and be saying that we must worship the elements, or it would be a sin?
I think that the only reason that someone would go to what Ambrose taught on this would be because they couldn't find that same teaching in Augustine. That's my thought on this, and I don't think it follows from something that Ambrose said, which we haven't really argued about.
So
that,
you don't think it would be
you know,
logical that he would follow the teachings of the one that catechized him, the one that taught him?
I didn't say I don't think it would be logical that he would follow that, but I think there's a good argument to be made that Ambrose's teaching is even further in that it's more barely symbolical.
Okay, well, we don't have enough time to go into Ambrose.
We're not here to debate that subject.
Absolutely, we don't have enough time to go into Ambrose, but I think it was a great points being brought up. But okay, I guess our cross-examination time is up, and I will now be ready to hear the closing from Turretinfan.